This means it has to be taken into consideration, and based on the measurements I have and how fast it's metabolized, I can make this recommendation about the dosage for patients. The main point maybe is this: if you keep this in mind, it has to be clear for your reader how you arrived at your conclusion. Don't give just the conclusion. Make it clear. Why do you recommend this? Yes, because you found this out. Say that. Because as it is, perhaps the data that supports this is in the results section. Some of it is, I know. Some of it isn't. But to figure that out, I have to go back and actually hunt through the results section to see where is it. That is not something that should happen. You should, like I said, summarize the most important findings on which you base your recommendations and give them here. So in the current example, we have a lot of recommendations, but if you read just the discussion, there does not appear to be any basis in research data, because that is never mentioned. That shouldn't happen in your discussion. So that's a recommendation, should be discontinued, and so on. On what data is this based? Because what I often see in other discussions too is that simply these recommendations are given, but they are not recommendations with which the people came up by themselves based on what they measured. These are recommendations which they found in the papers they used, because obviously they already measured. If you do a review, they measured something and they will also draw their own conclusions. Using the conclusions and recommendations of others in your discussion is tricky. First and foremost, they have to be your own. That's the first thing you do. Look at the data, answer the question, what does it tell you, what are the consequences? And then you also put it into the literature context and compare it to what others recommended. So in this case, in the literature review, you might have two parts where you do a literature context. You have to do it where it makes sense. Where do I compare? What do I compare? So based on the 6 studies I looked at, I come to the conclusion that at least 24 hours before surgery, it should be discontinued, because otherwise the risk of bleeding is too high, except for patients with a very high risk. That should be based on my data, and I should have said that in the paragraph before. And then I can put it into the context and say, others were of the opinion that, same as mine or not. If not, look at the differences. So you always have to draw your own conclusions first, and then you can look at what others concluded or recommended. Never use just their conclusions or recommendations, although it's tempting. Limitations, next to last, that's not mentioned in the study at all. It's, especially for a review, usually a small part. So I'm not going to kill a thesis because it's not there. But it's just like a good scientific practice to be aware of your limitations and your own shortcomings. For experimental thesis, same thing, maybe even more important. So, yeah, I said that already. Be critical, be self-critical. How reliable is it what you found? I mean, it's a difference if you found 15 studies or 2, obviously. It's a difference if the studies had very small populations which they studied or if they had very large ones. It's a difference if it's very good quality studies or not. Or you might want to look at, of the 15 studies, 2 are very good and the rest not so good, or the rest were just case studies and 2 were large multi-center studies. Then you also have to relate what you found in there. You have to weigh it. You don't do it statistically, mathematically, and that would be the meta-analysis, but you should do it qualitatively, at least in the discussion, if there are discrepancies. If not, you don't really have to. So basically, that's what it boils down to. Be self-critical, objective, but you do not have to beat your own study into the dust or something like that. Yes, that's not necessary. Just a healthy self-criticism. Last part, conclusions. These are the conclusions. And as you may expect, I'm going to say now, they are a bit too long. Keep them short. Really, the main findings, the main thing you want them to remember. Do not make a list of points that you think are important. The main one. So, take-home message. That should be in there. One sentence. If it's two, it's already a long take-home message. People tend to forget the second half. That should be there. If you like, if it fits some more details, 1 or 2 sentences you can add, maybe 3, which add some important summarized additional findings. You might want to add the main consequence for the clinical practice or the main consequence for future studies. That's it. More shouldn't be in there. And if you go back, it's a little bit much. The result here, that was probably the good start. The result of the thesis indicates that should be the take-home message. It's achievable. It's a bit vague. Could be more concrete based on what you found. Here it says within the limits of the study design. That actually starts to address study limitations, but it's the only sentence dealing with it, and it doesn't tell you what the limitations are. So, and if you address them, not in the conclusions, but in the main text. And this is potentially just a little bit too much detail, because there's some points. So in this, the main point people should remember gets lost. That shouldn't happen. The take-home message shouldn't be lost in the conclusions. Another side issue that's really just word usage. If you read these sentences, in oral surgery, surgical procedures are often performed without anticoagulation. That's a statement. That's not a conclusion you draw. The way it is written here with an R sounds like a background information. If you write it differently, in oral surgery, these procedures should be performed. Then it's a recommendation based on what you did, and if it's the important recommendation, then it has a place in the conclusions. Background obviously doesn't, but I think that might be an issue of word usage here, simply. So much for that. I don't know why this slide appears again. Oh yeah, what shouldn't be there? Take-home message. Said that. So that's a maybe. It's a little bit vague. Could be clearer, but it's there. That's not an absolute must, but sometimes you can add 1 or 2 interesting side issues, no more. And definitely, there shouldn't be any background information in there. You also shouldn't. That's not done here so much. I've seen that in other conclusions, much significant. I mean, it's like 1-page conclusion. That's not a conclusion for a 15 or 20-page results part and discussion. Avoid a point-by-point repetition of whatever you mentioned in the discussion. That's not the point of a conclusion. So that's really what to do. Take-home message. Yes, if of interest, you can do that, but do it shortly. Only the most important or interesting new findings, and do not repeat any type of general statement. You've already done that several times in the thesis, no place in the results. Just takes up space. Okay, and that's basically already what I wanted to say today regarding the results part. Next lecture in 2 weeks. And then we'll deal with finalizing the thesis. That includes writing the introduction, because by now, if you have the results part and if you have the discussion, materials and methods, that's 85% of the thesis, 90 almost. Introduction is comparatively simple. Comparison is also the least important of the parts. And I think it's better to write it in the end, because by then you know what you are introducing to. Then the issue of plagiarism. We always have to deal with that to a degree. It's on the rise, so should definitely be addressed. And some other points that have to do with finalizing, like format issues, like word usage, like usage of tables and graphs, whatever I can think of. Again, any questions you would like to see addressed in this context, please mail me, then I can do it. Also, Please remember the two tasks which I would still like you to perform. The first one, the correction of, basically, I'd like you to act as tutors and correct a thesis, but it's parts of a thesis, not a complete one. I uploaded those parts already. There are 5 files. There should be 5 different files. If you found just one, that's not quite enough. If you can't download them, there was some issue with someone, please contact me. I could download them. It worked for me, but I don't know if something is wrong. Those files are accessible now. I also wrote what I'd like you to do. Like, you are the tutor. This was sent to you. Please correct using what I told you up to now, and send it to me before the 29th of June. And then we'll talk about it in the lecture in detail and see what you came up with, what I came up with, and we can compare. And the second part, that'll be the last lecture of all, 13.7. I'm still putting it together. We'd like to see you do like a mini research task. Practice extracting the data and drawing some conclusions from it. So I'm still putting the papers together. I'm not 100% certain. I think it would probably be better and easier for you if you don't do it individually, but in groups. I cannot come up with, I think officially we are 13, which are never here, but never mind. I can't come up with that many different research tasks. It's kind of like a lot of work. So it might be nice if you kind of work together in maybe in 2s or 3s. And we'll see who actually does it. It's a little bit complicated here, but we'll see how that goes. I'll hopefully be able to send those out next week. I've already have some. I just need maybe 2 more. And I probably send that by mail, and it would be great if you could respond that you will actually do it or get into contact with each other or something like that, so I have some feedback about what to expect. Okay, that was it. Any questions?